I'm Dilek Tuna. Welcome to Africa News. Here are the top stories. Nigerian Airlines receive bailout amid Middle East disruptions. Leaders in East Africa plan to build an oil refinery to ease reliance on imports. And floods hit Somalia's capital again, with more rain on the way. Nigeria is stepping in to stabilise its aviation sector as rising fuel costs and mounting financial pressure push local airlines toward crisis. President Bola Tinubu has approved a 30% debt relief package, with further measures under review to ease strain across the industry.
Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has approved a 30% debt relief to local airlines, following talks with companies under pressure from rising fuel costs. The measure comes as airline executives say the industry has been pushed to the brink, with some operations nearly stopping altogether.
Bleeding. Yes, we threatened to shut down, not because we wanted to shut down, but because we had no money any longer to continue to borrow money from the banks just to pay for fuel and neglecting other things that are supposed to be done in the aviation industry.
Authorities are pushing for a quick resolution to pricing disputes that have strained the sector. The government will review taxes, levies and fees on domestic tickets, and a committee is expected to recommend cuts aimed at easing pressure on both airlines and passengers. Talks are ongoing to avert a disruption across Nigeria's aviation network. Nigeria is not alone. The impact of the war in the Middle East is being felt across the continent. Rising fuel costs and airspace disruptions are squeezing airlines and pushing ticket prices higher. Carriers are cutting routes and warning of deeper financial strain ahead.
East African countries are moving toward deeper energy cooperation as Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania explore plans for a shared oil refinery aimed at reducing reliance on imported fuel. The proposal, discussed at a regional summit in Nairobi, signals a push to strengthen local refining capacity and improve supply security.
East African countries, including Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania, are in talks to establish a common oil refinery in order to reduce growing reliance on imported fuel. Speaking at the Summit on Infrastructure Development in the Kenyan capital Nairobi, Kenyan President William Ruto said plans are underway for a joint refinery at Tanzania's port of Tanga, modelled after Nigeria's Dangote plant.
We are discussing that we're going to have a joint refinery in Tanga to benefit all of us, because that refinery is going to take on board the oil from DRC, the oil from Kenya, the oil from South Sudan, the oil from Uganda, and we will just need to build a short pipeline from Tanga to Mombasa, and the finished product will use the pipeline that we already jointly own with Uganda. So all our assets become profitable.
Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, who also attended the conference, said the plan is to complete the construction of the refinery within the next 4 to 5 years. East Africa currently imports all of its refined petroleum products, mainly from the Middle East. That leaves the region vulnerable to supply disruptions and price spikes, as seen in the fallout of the Iran conflict. Africa produces around 10 million barrels of oil per day, accounting for 10% of global output. However, the continent remains a net importer of petroleum products, with its fuel import bill exceeding $90 billion annually.
Heavy rains have brought parts of Mogadishu to a halt as flooding submerges key roads and disrupts daily life in the Somali capital. The latest downpours are once again exposing fragile infrastructure, with officials warning conditions could deteriorate further in the days ahead.
Heavy rains have flooded parts of Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, submerging roads and bringing transport to a standstill. Downpours on Thursday left major streets and busy junctions underwater, with cars and motorised rickshaws stranded as commuters were forced to wade through ankle-deep floodwater. The latest flooding has once again exposed the city's long-standing drainage problems just ahead of the main rainy season. In Mogadishu, a coastal city marked by rapid and largely unplanned urban expansion, seasonal rains frequently overwhelm infrastructure. Roads are often damaged or washed away, making daily movement difficult for residents. The situation is expected to worsen, with authorities already warning earlier this week of above-average rainfall across parts of southern Somalia in the coming days. Residents in flood-prone areas have been urged to take precautions as the risk of further disruption remains high.
Health officials are warning of a growing outbreak among displaced communities as limited access to clean water, sanitation and medical care raises the risk of wider spread. Aid agencies say urgent support is needed to contain the situation, with clinics under pressure and supplies running low. Michael Baleke reports.
Health workers say the outbreak is affecting Sudanese refugees living along the Chad-Sudan border, many displaced by months of fighting. They are seeing a steady rise in suspected cases, with children and young people most affected. Meningitis is a serious infection that spreads easily in overcrowded places, and in many of these camps, families are living close together in temporary shelters. Access to clean water, proper sanitation and medical care is limited, making it harder to control the spread. Doctors say early treatment is critical, but clinics are under pressure and supplies are running low. There are also concerns about vaccine shortages, slowing efforts to contain the outbreak. Aid groups are stepping in with emergency support, setting up treatment areas and calling for more vaccines and funding. But they say more help is needed, and quickly, to prevent the situation from getting worse. For many refugees, this is another crisis on top of what they have already gone through, fleeing violence and losing access to basic services back home. And with more people still arriving, agencies warn the risk of further spread remains high. Officials are urging faster support, including vaccines and medical supplies, to stop the outbreak from turning into a wider regional crisis. Michael Baleke for A-News in Kampala.
South Sudan is moving toward a potential turning point as the country prepares for its first general election since independence. The planned December vote comes amid lingering political tensions and significant logistical and economic challenges, raising questions over whether the process can deliver stability.
Nearly 15 years after gaining independence, South Sudan is preparing for what could be a historic milestone, its first general elections. The vote is planned for December, after years of delays linked to political instability and the legacy of civil conflict. South Sudan became independent in 2011, but just 2 years later, a power struggle between President Salva Kiir and his former deputy Riek Machar pushed the country into civil war. Kiir dismissed Machar as vice president, deepening political divisions that later spread into wider violence. A 2018 peace agreement was meant to end the violence and bring rival forces into a unity government, but that deal remains fragile. Opposition parties and international observers have criticised recent government moves to amend parts of the peace agreement without wider political backing. Tensions deepened after Machar was placed under house arrest in March 2025, before being charged with treason and other serious crimes in September. Authorities say they remain committed to holding elections on schedule, but analysts warn that preparations still have a long way to go. The National Election Commission faces funding and logistical gaps, and voter registration remains incomplete. The country is also under heavy economic pressure. Civil servants and members of the security forces have gone more than a year without their salaries, while inflation continues to rise. And although officials say their paychecks are now being prioritized, wider financial strain and security concerns remain major obstacles. For many South Sudanese, the chance to vote marks a long-awaited step toward democracy. But unless the political, financial and security gaps are addressed, there are fears the election could deepen instability rather than resolve it.
A group of migrants deported from the United States to the Democratic Republic of Congo say they're stranded in Kinshasa, raising concerns over conditions and a controversial third country deportation deal.
The first group of 15 migrants deported from the United States consists of nationals from Colombia, Peru and Ecuador. There are 7 women and 8 men who spent a week living in a residence on the outskirts of Kinshasa. They told journalists they are stranded and scared to live in the DRC capital. None of them speaks French, which is the official language of the DRC. Police and army vehicles are parked outside their residence and they are not allowed any visitors. The migrants were deported under a deal the DRC signed with the US government to send undocumented foreigners to third countries. Several human rights activists have criticized the deal as inhumane. But the US has signed similar deals with other African countries as the Trump administration steps up the deportation of illegal immigrants. The deal targets migrants whose home countries refuse to cooperate with their deportation or those who claim they would face persecution if sent back home. The United States is also in talks with Congolese authorities to send over 1,000 Afghans to the DRC. The Afghans are former Special Forces members and interpreters who helped US troops during the 2001 and 2021 war in Afghanistan. The move follows the US government's decision to end temporary protected status for the Afghans. Several lawmakers in the United States have described the plan to transfer the Afghans to the DRC as a fundamental betrayal of the US commitment to protect its allies. Chris Ochamringa for A News in Kinshasa.
And that's all we have today on Africa News. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.